Hello and welcome to Don't Shout at the Telly with me, your host, Saliha Ali. We're delighted to have with us today Austin Williams, architect and author. Austin is currently working on a book on sustainable development and progress, and that's what he's going to talk to us about today. So Austin, would you like to start us off?
Progress is about conscious human-centred activity. Progress is a tendency and a belief in overcoming natural barriers, and progress is increasing labour efficiency. We just need to kind of put people first and put nature second, to see humans as positive agents of change rather than see them as active agents of destruction, and to encourage more development without prefixes. Sustainable development and development are not the same thing.
So is it realistic to expect that you can have progress and labour efficiency maximisation with democratic rights and a Western idea of society?
So I'm not positing that material development is what progress is. I'm saying that through the ability to free yourself from the constraints of your work, from your relationship to nature, it therefore then allows you greater freedom to be creative, to demand freedoms, to aspire to change the world and all the rest of it. If you are a peasant where your only relationship is 23 hours a day working, tilling the ground, which is a very sustainable lifestyle, you don't have any other aspirations other than feeding yourself and waking up the next morning to do the same thing again. So it's that liberation, freeing yourself from nature is key, I think.
You mentioned the negative kind of connotations with sustainable development, but is there not a danger that if you're not conscious of the future implications of your actions now, that you kind of throw off any responsibility?
Okay, when you're talking about the implications for future generations, I think that you need to take a step back and really look at what's going on right now. I mean, in schools at the moment, being environmentally friendly and monitoring your carbon footprint, that's just being pushed on people so much. I mean, even on TV, there's an advert with a little girl having a bedtime story where the world is in absolute disaster, and she says, "Daddy, is there going to be a good ending?" And he says, "I don't know, it's up to you." And that pressure being put on children is actually worrying and really creepy in a way. But I don't think all of that needs to be put on us, and our whole lifestyle should change because of what we assume might happen in the future.
Seems to be two different sides of us, our potential to influence nature. For example, I don't think many people would disagree, including environmentalists, I don't think they'd disagree with putting in better flood defences, say following the floods in Cumbria or following Hurricane Katrina, if they had a better flood defence there, which to me seems like putting a man-made barrier against nature in a very literal sense. Yet people there's quite a lot of environmentalists then wouldn't encourage technology in the third world, for example.
Most people don't argue for flood defences for New Orleans. That's not the argument they use. They say they shouldn't have built there in the first place. The reason why 5 years after Hurricane Katrina people are still living in trailer parks is because they aren't rebuilding the houses fast enough, because they don't think it's a sensible thing to do anymore. So there's definitely a much broader mindset where people aren't aspiring to massive infrastructure projects, much more small scale. The goal of the national grid, for example, in the 20s and 30s, was to provide electricity to everyone in the country, which is a fantastic ambition. Whereas now, the goal of energy policy is for you to provide your own electricity, and if there's a blackout, at least you'll survive.
Could you see how it would free us from nature if we weren't relying on oil that took millions of years to put down and therefore will run out?
But it's a renewable energy reliant on nature as well.
On wind and sun and tidal patterns, which, if they run out, the world's over anyway.
Happy days. No, I mean, renewables, obviously, wind tends always to blow, well, not always, but, 30% of the day. Sunshine is for slightly less than that. But the sun's not going to burn out for 6 billion years, so it's a bit better than the coal, which probably may run out in depends who you talk to, 30 years, 100 years, who knows. Renewable energy means that you can renew it, it's there, whereas if you've got a carbon, resources, coal and all the rest of it, mathematically it should run out. You look at the Earth, which is a certain size, percentage of that is coal, by definition it should at some point disappear. But I'm saying that humanity's not like that. Do you know what I mean? We basically invent things. Nuclear power stations are actually much more efficient and productive than a wind turbine. The idea of nuclear fusion would be even better, but Japan is now doing geothermal boreholes off the coastline, and they said, America in the 60s had space, they went up, we are going down, and they're doing 17-kilometre deep holes to get geothermal heating. Sounds fantastically innovative to me. I mean, I'm not going to quibble, but I just think, again, that's the technology, that's the thing itself, and I don't think we need to get bogged down with a technological debate about which is better. I think they all are things. It's what we do with them and what they then represent in political terms that we have to discuss.
Do you think that is the primary concern, or should be the primary concern of the developing world, and, for example, China and India, that, because I don't think so. I don't think their primary concern should be to use renewable energy resources, and I don't know, even nuclear energy. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's one of those kind of great impositions by the West to tell China and India that they should be developing in a certain way. But we miss the point that Chinese development is really rapid and it's bringing people out of poverty really quickly, and to deny them that means putting people back in poverty and putting them on a hold until solar panel technology becomes industrialised, which it isn't yet.
Do you not think there's a middle ground? I'd like to ask you that, because it seems that often the two tribes, in terms of green issues and development and unfettered growth, are stacked against each other. Isn't it possible for there to be sustainable development that isn't necessarily backward looking, that doesn't have the kind of fatalistic view of the world that you've argued for?
No. I'm afraid it is backward looking. If all you ever innovate is something which can be proved not to cause a carbon footprint, that's a very tunnel vision view of innovation. It's the opposite of innovation.
So I personally believe that it comes down fundamentally to how much stock you put into climate change and the damage it's going to actually do. If you fully buy into that, then surely that concern is justified, because you're doing something which is safeguarding the future.
But my logic is that even if carbon dioxide is caused by humanity, even if the rise in carbon emissions causes the sea levels to rise, even if sea level rise will flood parts of the world, it still doesn't mean for me that we should stop innovating, building cars, power stations, using energy, and really experimenting for the way forward. Because I think that the way that it's going at the moment is a survivalist mentality, right? So it sort of says, we're causing all this carbon, it's a problem, and we have to rein it in. So it's like sitting in a basement with a shotgun and some cans of beans waiting for the apocalypse, right? Without any ability to change it and intervene in it. If we think of ourselves as a problem, we're never going to solve anything, regardless of how great a magnitude global warming tends to be. Just to say, I think sustainable development is misanthropic, parochial, limiting, condescending, and generally a miserablest view to have on the world.
What we consider as saving our future, right, in terms of environmentalism, isn't what people in the developing world consider as having a better future. They move to cities to have a better future. That's their version of development.
You kind of wrote off sustainable development as parochial and condescending. I'm assuming kind of taking a neo-colonialism look at it and saying, oh, why would they want to leave the land, they're happy on the land kind of thing. Why would they want our kind of technology? But is that not kind of almost, in a way, condescending itself? Because you're kind of assuming that they're not happy with what they've got. The only reason why they kind of know about this kind of technological Western way of life is because actually in the first place it was imposed upon them through colonialism. So you're kind of writing them off again and interrupting them again by saying, oh, actually they want this. But it's kind of an assumption, really, is what I'm saying.
History tends to dictate that people want to improve their lives, right? And people do become aware of the fact that working all hours God sent on the land doesn't allow them the kind of freedoms and the aspirations and the material benefits that they see around them.
Well, I think it's quite subjective, though, that your definition of happiness and improving your life is away from the land, is like technologically kind of associated with that. I know that previous generations of my family who weren't from Britain, the industrial age, the kind of industrialisation, they lived more on the land, but it wasn't, 9 to midnight kind of working on the land. It was more of a closed environment, family, kind of familial environment. And they said that the standard of living was good, but their perception of standards of living isn't, you can't compare the two, it's subjective. Their standard of living was in terms of enjoying one another's company, it was family, it was a unit. They worked, they lived off the land, they were happy and content, but they didn't associate standards of living with in terms of comfortability of home and decor and goods and products and technology and making life easier.
You know, looking at serfdom as happiness is what, you know, American slave owners used to say in, you know, 200 years ago. They may not have any freedom, but they're happy. They whistle all the time.
I do not think that sustainable development is the way to go forward and the way to progress, because if I look at myself and I look at the things I have, the technology in my house, the way we live, that's something I've always grown up with. I've always had a computer in my house. Now, that technology developing, okay, so I've got a laptop now. That makes my life easier and therefore I become happier. That's something that is become a comfort to me, and for that to be taken away because, oh, I need to recharge my battery and use too much electricity, that would then make my life more difficult and make it more unhappy and not enable me to get on with my life the way that I want it to. And when you look at other countries, I mean, to say that they don't want to develop or that they don't have ideas of having technology around them, I think that in itself is really demeaning, because they might be in a small village working hard and you say, well, at least they've got each other around them. Well, you know, if people here have families and they have technology and different forms of developed elements around them, and they can be happy too. I mean, I think I'm reasonably happy and content with my lifestyle, and I think that other people around the world deserve to have that as well, and deserve to at least get to say what they want and not be completely written off because, oh, if you have that, your carbon footprint is going to be too high.
I mean, there's a lot of feeling at the minute of anti-consumerism, and a lot of people are quite disillusioned with, you know, the kind of day in, day out, you know, consumerist mantra that we're supposed to sort of, you know,
in the West, though.
In the West, yeah. But I mean, what would you? I mean, do you think that's valid then, or that kind of that way of thinking?
I think that people they should buy things that they want. I don't think that people should be told what to do or should be told what they can't do or should have or shouldn't have.
What I think you missed the point is that the only reason why people in third world countries want technology is because they've been made to want, they're told to want it. Like the West knows best kind of ideology was forced upon them through colonialism, but it shouldn't be just assumed straight from the off that the West knows best, this is the way to live, this is the best way to live. It should be assumed that it's just accepted at face value. That was the point.
The West doesn't always know best. I think that's pretty obvious. But if you look at it in terms of different forms of progress, like what if a person in Ghana wants to be a doctor and they live in this village where basically they're being told that they should be a farmer for cocoa beans or something like that, and they want to get out of that, they want to progress that way. Well, they're told, no, look, actually this is the way our family works and this is the way we're always going to be, farmers. So what about that type of progress and that type of development? They're moving up, they're getting an education as well. Should they be told, no, they can't get that?
Ash, I just wanted to say, you know, you say something like, who are we to tell other people what they want, la la la, and the whole thing about colonialism. Western countries are not telling China to develop. What we're actually telling them is quite the opposite. I don't know if that's what you are saying, but we're telling them to develop sustainably. And so, you know, you can't just say about a whole population of people that they're so stupid, so brainwashed that they can't think for themselves. And you're saying when we say that that's you know, progress is a good thing and people want it and strive for it, you're saying that's condescending. But in effect, what you're saying is they're so stupid they don't know what they want, and we're telling them what they want and they follow. Isn't that equally condescending?
No, I'm not calling anybody stupid or brainwashed.
I know you didn't say that.
I'm saying if they want something, they should be able to have it. It's their human right. It's fundamentally.
And where does that come
as
from?
a human
Out of the
being,
air?
they should have it. But
That
I'm
comes
just saying,
with development, Ash.
But I'm just saying
That
it
freedom.
shouldn't be assumed that necessarily the idea of progress, as described by Austin, kind of in terms of is heavily associated with technology. I don't think that's all that should be seen as being the ideal form of progress.
But I don't
what I'm saying.
think material progress or technological development or whatever necessarily takes away exploitation and all those sort of, you know, problems we might have with it, but it does create the opportunity and the potential for human liberty, and that's the point about it.
So sweatshop labour in India, one of the
But that's
biggest
exactly what I
human
said. Okay, so what I'm saying is, I don't think just because we see sweatshops and exploitation and all that, we should sort of throw out the baby of economic growth with the bathwater of capitalism or whatever you want to call it, right?
The problem with sustainable development is that it's an ideological framework which sets the idea that limits are somehow positive rather than limits. Right? We've always seen limits as being constraining, whereas now we sort of see them as a useful framework. And that's the point I'm trying to make. Is I just think we need to free ourselves from this, you know, this cage of sustainable development and argue for development.
Yeah, I think that the reason that nobody's really arguing with that sustainable development is because the issues put out there as though it is the final solution, it is the only solution out there, and that it is the right way to go. I mean, our councils tell us that we should recycle, and if we don't, we'll get fined for it. They tell us to do certain things, sort out our rubbish into different categories, otherwise it isn't collected, and all this just evolves into one big issue, and people, you know, think that's the only way they can live and they should live. You know, turning your lights out as you go out of your room, and seeing polar bears melting on your TV screen if you put your washing machine a degree higher. All of that sort of scares people into thinking that sustainable development is the only way they can go through. So the issue isn't what other alternatives are there, it's how can we put those different things into practice.
I agree with your point, Adina, but I wanted to ask that, isn't by saying that development through, like, relying on development will therefore get us out of the issues of climate changes and global warming, isn't that romanticising the nature of human beings? Because we do have limits, like there's only so much we could do. Isn't it romanticising it and just a whole fantasy instead of like dealing with what we know now and doing what we know now and then dealing with that later?
But the thing is, what we don't know what's going to happen in the future, and we can't base everything on an alleged idea and what we think may happen, because our whole lives are going to completely change and be completely different, and it might be for no good reason at all. I think that if we move on and we sort of, instead of looking at, like you say, nature, you start looking at other human beings and saying, actually, in this day and age, there shouldn't be one person in the world that's starving. And you think, okay, so how can we get ourselves out of that mess? And the way forward is development. So I think that we need to, if there are more people in the world that are fully developed, if they get better education, if they live in better societies, then we can actually all work together and think of more ideas about how to change the global environment that we're in. And I think that people need to look at it from that perspective, humans first, nature second, like you're saying, and then I think we'll come up with better ideas and move away from just sustainable development being the only answer.
I think you said it all. I think that I find nothing warming about the notion that we should limit our horizons. And unfortunately, it's not about individuals and the way that they respond to it, because funnily enough, people still fly, people still drive cars. So thankfully, people ignore a lot of this nonsense. But ultimately, there's a general clamping down on, in a political and philosophical level, about what is possible. And I think that's the real danger that I would like to get across, as the danger about sustainable development and the undermining of the notion of progress is all premised on the idea of limits and of humanity being seen as fundamentally a problem. We need to reinvigorate the notion of humanity, and as you say, the more humanity the better, is the potential cause for progress and solutions, not seeing ourselves as causes of harm all the time.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. That was really interesting and lots to think about there, so thank you very much, Austin. If you want to get involved in Don't Shout at the Telly, do drop us a line and do leave your comments on the website.